Day and welcome back.
Hey, Kerry. Yeah, if the Dow doesn't move by 200 points, it's like an unchanged day anymore with volatility lately.
Yes.
But today it's an up day. As we're speaking, the Dow's up 291 and the S&P is up a similar amount in percentage terms. So yeah, it's a big up day today. But if it's possible to trace things back to their actual cause in the stock market, which it isn't always, a lot of the times the market will move and then people will say, oh, it was because of this or that, and they're just making it up. But this time around, it looks like the Italians blinked in their argument with the European Union about how big their budget deficit can be. And the European Union was threatening some fairly serious repercussions if Italy didn't get in line. And it looks like Italy got in line. So
really,
this isn't really that big of a story for Americans normally, but I'm bringing it up to illustrate how everybody out there is in this box where they're in trouble no matter what they do. And in Italy's case, the populist government got elected on a platform of using government spending to solve a lot of domestic problems. But they found out that was financially impossible to do because the bond market rebelled and the European Union wouldn't cooperate with them. And so now they're going back to what might feel like austerity to the Italian public, which means political turmoil will be the result of that, because if this new government that they put in and gave a chance to try something different and fix these problems doesn't fix the problems, they'll replace that government with somebody else.
Somebody crazier, right?
Yeah. So they had a choice between potential political instability and certain financial instability, and they chose future political instability, which means that nothing is solved. The next government will come in with the same set of promises and we'll go through the same process. So Italy is basically toast as a financial system. It really doesn't matter what they do. And the same is true of most of the rest of the world. It doesn't matter what we do from here on out because we've already borrowed all the money that's going to cause us trouble in the future. We've already done that. We've made the mistake and we can't fix it without getting rid of that debt. And the only way to get rid of a bunch of debt is by going through an extremely painful process of one kind or another. So now in the U.S., we're reaching the point where all news is bad news. In good times, all news is good news, right?
Yes,
no matter what happens, you interpret it in a good way and buy stocks because of it. Now, for instance, if the stock market goes up here, that's kind of good news, right? But that takes the pressure off the Fed as far as interest rates go, and we'll get more interest rate increases. The Fed will feel free to tighten further, and that will cause a crisis out there in the future. So the good news of the stock market increasing or government or national growth improving, the GDP going up, or anything like that leads to higher interest rates from the Fed, which leads to a financial crisis in the future, and vice versa. If bad news happens, for instance, the economy slows way down or anything else related to or stock markets crash, that's bad news. But it remains bad news because that's going to destabilize the rest of the financial system. So no matter what happens, stocks go up, stocks go down, the economy grows, the economy shrinks. It's all bad news now going forward because we've screwed up the system so completely that it really doesn't matter what happens. So, Kerry, you and I will have a lot to talk about, but it's all going to be framed in the same way over the next couple of years. Well, this happened and it's bad news because.
Yeah.
And today's stock market pop is basically another example of that. If this lets the Fed raise interest rates in December, where that is now kind of in question, it's completely possible that if the stock market continued to crash, the Fed wouldn't raise interest rates in December, but now they'll do it if stocks stabilize from here or even go up, and maybe in January again. So instability is the order of the day, in other words.
Yes, it is. No question. And, it's just It's just another one of those things, right?
Well, it's what happens when you borrow too much money. Mm-hmm. Things start to spin out of control, and nothing works anymore. So no matter what you try, it fails. Italy just found that out. The European Union in general is finding it out across the board. France.
Yeah.
That's another example of, there are violent street protests in France now.
Yeah, very violent.
Because the government tried to raise diesel fuel taxes. Mm-hmm. And that was an attempt to get their finances in order. But if you attempt to get your finances in order, you get political instability. That's just how it works now. That we're this far gone financially, and it's the same pretty much everywhere. Let the Fed tighten here. Let Donald Trump decide he wants to rein in his budget deficits, and that unleashes chaos. So it's that way everywhere, and the names are different, but the story is the same, and there's really no way out of it. So the next few years are going to see what's happening here in the U.S. now or in Europe now, magnified. It's going to be current turmoil on steroids. And what that leads to, the last thing I published, as you said, was something titled, "Is This Now a Short Everything in Sight Market?" Because
yes.
in 2018, more asset classes have gone down as a percentage of the total number of asset classes out there than in the last 20 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. The reason for that is because more asset classes went up in concert over the previous 5 or so years.
It was, but here's the thing, people like to say it's a bubble, everything's a bubble, or a Ponzi scheme, all right? I'm not quite buying that it's a bubble in terms of the traditional definition of a bubble, something that goes up exponentially and then comes down exponentially, like Bitcoin. Speaking of bubbles, right? Bitcoin's pretty amazing when you think about it. It's at 3,700. My prediction was 3,880. And when it hit 5,000, everybody was saying, "Oh, buying opportunity." I said, So that was a bubble. But there's other things that appear to be bubbles that really aren't. And certainly that is one of them. So it's definitely an interesting phenomena. And I think we've got a lot more to go in the crypto space, that really, it's just going to keep going on and on and on for a while, and till its logical conclusion. And cryptos, I said there were kleptocurrencies here, and we're getting to see it firsthand here, John.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that the dynamic in cryptocurrencies is understandable by anybody. It's a brand new technology being introduced that is going to go the way new technologies go, which is to say it's going to disrupt existing systems in ways that we can't predict because it's never happened before, or it's going to flame out and turn out not to work and be replaced by something else. And I have no idea what that's going to be in the coming few years. So Bitcoin, it could go to that 100,000 that a lot of people are predicting, and it could also cease to exist.
Yeah, it's not going to go to that 100,000. It's more than likely there's a major weakness in it. I'm going to be writing a newsletter about it very shortly, and it's more than likely going to die than go to 100,000. But we'll get into that later. Everybody has an opinion on it, obviously, but definitely things are heating up. You feel a change in what's going on, don't you?
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Egypt is on the verge, once again, becoming a world-renowned gold producer. The Golden Age is being rediscovered. For millennia, ancient Egyptian kingdoms prospered from unparalleled riches. Pharaohs built their empires and flaunted their abundant wealth that was made possible by the country's resource-rich gold deposits. Despite this rich history, modern Egypt remains one of the most underdeveloped gold mining countries in the world. Aton Resources is at the center of the modern Egyptian mining world, diligently working both as the only public exploration company in Egypt today and as the advocate for mining reform with the Egyptian government. However, those that arrive early like Aton will reap the best rewards. Aton's discovery of the legendary Lost Mountain of Gold at Rodruin and its current aggressive drilling program there could potentially reap those rewards. Aton Resources is focused on its 100% owned Abu Marawat concession in the Arabian-Nubian Shield, located 200 kilometers north of Centamin Sakari's world-class gold mine. Aton possesses first-mover advantage in the under-followed jurisdiction of Egypt, which is currently undergoing mining reform. To stay on top of Aton's latest drill results and news, go to atonresources.com. Aton trades on the TSX-V under the ticker AAN and on the OTC under the ticker ANLBF.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Well, in Bitcoin in general, or in
the markets,
in particular, or the markets in general?
In the markets in general, but Bitcoin as well. It was never supposed to go down this low, John.
Well, Bitcoin's one of the assets on that list that is down this year, along with almost everything else. There are just a handful of things that are still up. And the reason that everything went up in lockstep over the past few years is the world central banks have been just creating a torrent of currency and just dumping it into the banking system. So, everything, this was a rising tide that lifted all boats, but it was a rising monetary tide, which is to say inflationary. So that was where the inflation was from all that currency that was created. It happened in financial asset prices, with all of which went up. And in that sense, it's a money bubble. Currency is in a bubble, and that's creating inflation, which is finding its way into financial asset prices. Now that we've started to tighten, you're seeing everything fall in unison, which isn't any better for hedge funds. These poor hedge fund guys, the smartest investors in the world, and they have these systems that can tell what's overvalued and what's undervalued in theory. And they just got crushed as a category of investment company in the run-up of the past 5 years, because everything went up together. So these black box models that differentiate between assets within asset classes didn't work. And now you think when a bear market starts that hedge funds would finally start to outperform, but because everything is going down in unison, it doesn't work in the other direction for them either. It's just been a really tough time for these guys who were prior to the last 4 or 5 years were considered to be, the cream of the investment community crowd, the smartest guys.
Smartest guys in the room.
Yeah, and by and large, they are very smart people, but they're in an environment where what they're trying to do doesn't work,
Yes.
And so if it becomes a market where, everything is going to fall in unison, then short everything, right? It doesn't matter what you short. It's going to go down. That's how you make money, just as it didn't matter what you bought, really, other than gold in the past 5 or so years. It went up, and psychologically, it's a whole different thing. If it's a short everything in sight market, that really changes market psychology in a hurry, because no matter what you do, it doesn't work. So if you're a big investor, a small investor, corporate treasurer, or whatever, you start to question your judgment because all you're doing is making mistakes. And that makes you extremely risk averse. When you try 5 different things, thinking that 3 are going to work and 2 are going to fail, and you're going to make out overall, your net profit will be positive. But all 5 of them fail, then you start to question whether you understand the world, whether you're smart enough to be doing your job. And you conclude that maybe you're not, and so you're going to pull back and be super conservative, which means you're going to raise cash. Or you're going to buy safe havens like precious metals. So this could easily be a time in which gold and silver are almost the only thing that goes up and everything else is going down. And that's just a mirror image of the past 5 years, right?
Yeah.
You could have bought anything except precious metals and made money. And now you can buy.
Now you tell me. Now you tell me.
No,
Jesus, why didn't you tell me before? Where were you when I needed you, John?
Yeah, I was telling you to buy precious metals and short stocks. That's what I was doing.
Yeah, but that's not altogether fair here. Let's face it. I mean, we never said buy precious metals with the expectation of an immediate return, right?
No, but personally, I thought it would be sooner than this. Mm-hmm. When gold dropped from 1900 to 1500, mm-hmm. that felt like a bottom to me.
Yeah,
from fundamental reasons as well as just sense of the world, and that was 3 years ago, and it hasn't worked out since then. But frequently in life, things take way longer than you think they're going to. That's just how it works. And, it would be nice if everything happened exactly when it should happen, but that just isn't how life works. And precious metals is a good example of that. And shorting is a good example of that. There's a whole category of short sellers out there that wished they'd been in cash for the past 5 years instead of trying to figure out what to short. David Einhorn is a really good example of that. High profile, brilliant fund manager who I think he hadn't had a losing year in a long stretch, years and years and years. He'd made money every year. And then he decides that the FANG stocks are short sale candidates several years ago, and puts out a big short list that he publicizes and everything. And those stocks continued to go up. Mm-hmm. And he continued to report terrible results and lost a lot of clients because of it. Mm-hmm. And he was right fundamentally back then. Those stocks were overvalued by almost any conceivable historical measure of value. And yet they kept on going up, which is what bubbles do. They go up to the point where they can't go up anymore. Mm-hmm. You commit to the fact that they can't go up anymore, and then they go up for another 2 years, and they crush your spirit before they crash. So it's psychologically hard to play bubble markets because they're not normal or natural. Because
they're not rational.
Because they've got this outside capital flowing in. Bubbles tend to feed on money flowing in from outside. In other words, somewhere else, people are giving up on whatever it is they're doing, and they're moving into the sector that becomes a bubble. And that's an extraordinarily powerful process that can last a lot longer than you would think. And this time around, it was, central banks with unlimited printing presses dumping basically unlimited amounts of money into the system. So it gave this global financial bubble, if we want to call it the everything bubble, even though that's not always accurate, but most things bubble.
The everything but gold bubble.
Yeah, everything but gold bubble. And that gave that bubble legs that it wouldn't have had if central banks weren't just running the printing presses flat out, and once they stop, the air pockets that are under a lot of financial asset prices will just be astounding. Mm-hmm. So the question is, what do central banks do going forward? The U.S. is trying to tighten, trying to get back to normal, right? And the European Central Bank is making noises about trying to get back to normal, but isn't doing it yet. China and Japan are still extremely easy. So it's a mixed bag out there.
I guess there's a new normal coming, John.
Well, and the new normal is going to be brutal pretty soon because you beyond a certain point, you can't liquefy a system without creating problems on the bubble side of the spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. If asset prices go up to levels that are absolutely fundamentally unsustainable, and people have borrowed huge amounts of money betting on the continuation of the bubble, then you've created the conditions for a gigantic crash. And central banks know that, so they want to tighten. They want to get back to more normal levels of interest rates and normal levels of currency creation, but The danger if they do that is that they've already created huge air pockets under financial asset prices. So that's what we saw in the U.S. just lately here in the last, has it even been a month since things started to really fall apart? Maybe not, but the Fed started to tighten, stocks continued to go up, and then at the point that the Fed actually tightened, when it started to really bite, stocks just tanked. And you saw a lot of the big bulletproof tech stocks go into actual bear markets, 20% drops in the space of no time at all, while the economy was still growing and while they were still reporting excellent numbers, which gives you an idea of the air pockets under these stocks. So wait for the next recession when their numbers aren't so good anymore, when they actually report plateauing sales growth or falling profits, or to the extent that they even have any profits now. 60, 70, 80% declines in their share prices become conceivable. And once they're conceivable, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people can picture Amazon dropping by another 50% from here, they don't want to buy that stock, because 50% drop would be catastrophic, right? And that's what fuels recessionary bear markets, is everybody, because the big numbers out there are no longer positive, everybody decides that horrible things are possible, which they couldn't conceive of during the good times. And they get risk averse. So they don't want to hold these high-flying stocks, and they tank. So that's the conditions that we've created out there now. Central banks know that, but they don't know what to do about it. Because if they keep blowing up the bubble, then the air pockets under these stocks get even bigger, and the eventual crash gets even more catastrophic. But if they try to prick the bubble now, it's still bad. It's still politically and financially and potentially geopolitically a really bad thing. And they don't want it to happen, but they don't know how to stop it.
Mm-hmm. And that is what it comes down to. Once you open Pandora's box, there's a lot of toothpaste that can't be squeezed back into the tube, John, if I can maliciously malign an old cliche, right?
Well, there's that great quote from either Hayek or von Mises. I always get those guys mixed up. But to the effect that once you've created a credit bubble, there's no painless way out of it. You have to have the crash that wipes out the bad debt that you allowed to come into existence by creating the credit bubble. Mm-hmm. And that's what central banks around the world are staring at now. They've allowed immense amounts of debt to be taken on. A lot of that debt was speculative. In other words, potentially bad debt. As soon as the numbers on the macro stage turn negative, that speculative debt turns into bad debt. And you can see the statistics out there. Already, we have an immense amount of BBB rated corporate debt in the U.S., which is to say one step away from being junk. And so these corporations only need to be forced to raise capital via the debt markets again, or see their sales growth slow or have a bad earnings year, and they get downrated to junk. And that sets off the tidal wave. All of a sudden, this debt that was speculative becomes bad, and it spreads to customers and clients and investors, the psychological effects of that. And, it spreads across a society. So we've created those conditions. And it becomes now just a question of timing. Are they going to take steps to prick the bubble now by continuing to raise interest rates in the U.S. and tightening a bit in Europe and Asia? Or are they going to just let it rip, and continue to produce enough new currency to keep the bubble going at the cost of even more bad debt being taken on and a bigger crash later? We don't know what they'll choose. Mm-hmm. But one way or another, the one commonality in these two scenarios is a big crash. Maybe it's this year, maybe it's 2 years from now, but either way, bad things happen because of all the debt we've taken on.
Mm-hmm. We know that's for sure. And bad things are going to continue to happen, unfortunately.